Hypatia of Alexandria, the brightest mathematician and philosopher of her age, a woman whose wisdom drew students from across the Mediterranean, was silenced in the most brutal way. Torn between politics, power, and religion, her voice of reason was erased, and with her death, libraries fell into silence, discoveries vanished into dust. But what if Hypatia had lived? What knowledge, what future might she have given us? Her forbidden wisdom remains one of history's greatest what-ifs, a question that still haunts us today. You're settling into your pillow now, as the Mediterranean breeze carries whispers of a woman who dared to think when thinking was dangerous. In 4th century Alexandria, Hypatia stood before crowds of eager students, her voice echoing through marble halls as she unraveled the mysteries of mathematics and astronomy. She was the city's most celebrated teacher, drawing scholars from across the Roman Empire to hear her lectures on Ptolemy and Plato. Her fingers traced geometric proofs on papyrus, while her mind soared among the stars, calculating celestial movements with breathtaking precision. But as Christianity rose and tolerance faded, her very existence became a threat to those who preferred faith over reason. In 415 CE, an angry mob silenced forever the woman who had illuminated minds across the ancient world. What wisdom might we have inherited if curiosity had been allowed to flourish instead of fear? Hey friends, if you're enjoying these quiet journeys through time, don't forget to subscribe for more bedtime stories from history's forgotten corners. Now, close your eyes and imagine dusty caravan routes stretching endlessly under starlit skies. In 14th century Morocco, a young legal scholar named Ibn Battuta set out for a simple pilgrimage to Mecca. 30 years later, he had traversed more of the world than Marco Polo ever dreamed possible. His sandaled feet had walked through the courts of Delhi sultans, across the Sahara's golden dunes, and along China's ancient trade routes. He documented cultures, customs, and cities with the keen eye of both lawyer and poet, recording a world that was about to change forever. Yet while Marco Polo's name echoes through classrooms, Ibn Battuta's extraordinary odyssey sleeps quietly in the margins of history, waiting for curious minds to rediscover his wandering spirit. How many other epic journeys lie hidden in the spaces between the stories we think we know? You're breathing slowly now, letting your mind drift to a misty German valley where a remarkable woman changed the world one revelation at a time. In the 12th century, Abbess Hildegard claimed divine visions guided her pen as she wrote treatises on medicine, music, and theology that challenged the very foundations of medieval thought. Her monastery garden bloomed with healing herbs she prescribed for ailments both physical and spiritual. She composed haunting melodies that seemed to bridge earth and heaven, conducted correspondence with popes and emperors, and fearlessly criticized church corruption when it crossed her path. Scholars traveled hundreds of miles to seek her wisdom, yet later centuries forgot the woman who had boldly claimed God spoke directly through her voice. Her manuscripts gathered dust while history remembered mainly the men who had sought her counsel. What voices of wisdom have we silenced by assuming only certain people could speak for the divine? Picture enormous ships, larger than Christopher Columbus could ever imagine, cutting silently through turquoise waters as you drift deeper into sleep. In early 15th century China, Admiral Zheng He commanded treasure fleets of unprecedented scale, with ships nearly 400 feet long carrying 28,000 sailors, soldiers, merchants, and diplomats across the Indian Ocean. His 7 expeditions reached Southeast Asia, India, Persia, Arabia, and the eastern coast of Africa, establishing trade relationships and diplomatic ties decades before European explorers had even conceived of such journeys. Chinese porcelain, silk, and knowledge flowed to distant lands, while exotic animals, spices, and tributes returned to Beijing. Yet, when a new emperor ascended the throne, isolationist policies ended these magnificent voyages forever. China turned inward, leaving the seas open for Portuguese and Spanish ships that would reshape global history. How different might our world have been if curiosity had continued to sail those vast blue highways? You're in a sunlit Renaissance studio now, where the scent of oil paints mingles with determination as a woman holds her brush like a sword of truth. In early 17th century Italy, Artemisia Gentileschi became the first woman admitted to the prestigious Florence Academy of Fine Arts, wielding her talent with fierce precision in a world that preferred women silent and invisible. Her paintings blazed with emotional intensity and technical mastery that rivaled any male contemporary, depicting strong biblical and mythological heroines with unprecedented psychological depth. When personal tragedy struck and a public trial threatened to destroy her reputation, she channeled her pain into art that spoke truths about power, justice, and survival. Her canvases commanded high prices from noble patrons across Europe, yet art history's narrative gradually painted over her contributions, crediting her works to male teachers and contemporaries. What masterpieces hang in our museums with the wrong names attached, waiting for justice to restore their true creators? Breathe deeply as we journey to 9th century Baghdad, where mathematical symbols dance like poetry across parchment in the soft glow of oil lamps. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi worked quietly in the House of Wisdom, translating ancient Greek and Indian mathematical texts while developing revolutionary new methods for solving equations. His systematic approach to mathematical problems gave birth to what we now call algebra, from the Arabic al-jabr, meaning reunion of broken parts. European scholars would later translate his works, spreading his innovations across the continent and laying the foundation for modern mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. His name evolved into our word algorithm, yet few who use algebraic equations or computer algorithms today recognize the gentle scholar whose midnight calculations illuminated pathways to our digital age. How many times each day do we unconsciously use the gifts of minds we've forgotten to remember? You're walking through cobblestone streets of Constantinople now, where a remarkable woman orchestrated one of history's most sophisticated rescue operations from behind silk curtains and coded letters. Born Beatriz de Luna in Portugal, she lived as a crypto-Jew during the Inquisition, publicly practicing Christianity while secretly maintaining her ancestral faith. When her husband died, leaving her one of Europe's wealthiest women, she used her vast banking network to smuggle thousands of persecuted Jews to safety across the Ottoman Empire. Ship captains, merchants, and diplomats carried her secret messages, coordinating escapes that saved entire communities from persecution and death. Sultan Suleiman himself granted her refuge in Constantinople, where she finally lived openly as Gracia Mendes Nasi, the Jewish matriarch who had outwitted the Inquisition itself. What other networks of courage operated in history's shadows, saving lives while leaving barely a trace? Stars twinkle gently overhead as you discover a brilliant mind from 18th century China, where a young woman unraveled celestial mysteries that had puzzled scholars for centuries. Wang Zhenyi mastered mathematics, astronomy, and poetry with equal grace, calculating lunar phases and explaining solar eclipses through careful observation and innovative experimentation. In her family courtyard, she recreated eclipse conditions using a round table, crystal ball, and lamp, demonstrating how the moon's shadow creates the spectacular phenomenon that had long been attributed to dragons devouring the sun. She wrote treatises on the Pythagorean theorem and translated complex mathematical works into accessible language, believing that knowledge belonged to everyone, not just elite scholars. Her poems celebrated both scientific discovery and social justice, yet traditional Chinese society gradually forgot the woman who had illuminated both earthly and celestial truths. How many brilliant minds have we lost to the assumption that genius wears only certain faces? Sleep comes gently now as we follow ancient trade routes, where a remarkable diplomat carried impossible dreams across continents in the 13th century. Rabban Bar Salma, a Nestorian Christian monk born in Beijing, journeyed westward on a pilgrimage that transformed into one of history's most significant diplomatic missions. The Mongol Khan sent him as an ambassador to European courts, seeking alliances against common enemies in the Middle East. This Chinese-born Christian monk met with the Pope in Rome, the King of France, and English nobles, conducting delicate negotiations that might have reshaped the relationship between East and West forever. He celebrated Mass in Latin churches while wearing Mongol diplomatic robes, bridging worlds that seemed impossibly distant. Though his mission ultimately failed to achieve its grand political goals, his journey proved that understanding could flow in both directions along the Silk Road. What bridges might we build today if we remembered that connection has always been possible across any distance? You're in the warm embrace of learning now, where the sound of turning pages mingles with quiet wisdom in 9th century Morocco. Fatima al-Fihri inherited her father's wealth and chose to invest it in something revolutionary, a center of learning that would welcome scholars regardless of their background or beliefs. The University of Al-Qarawiyyin in Fez, which she founded and funded, became a beacon of knowledge that attracted students from across Africa, Europe, and the Middle East for over 1,000 years. Mathematics, medicine, theology, astronomy, and philosophy flourished within its walls, while its library preserved countless manuscripts that might otherwise have been lost to time. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars studied side by side, sharing insights that advanced human understanding in ways both subtle and profound. Yet history often forgets that this millennium-old institution, still operating today, exists because one woman believed in the power of education. Hey friends, if you love discovering these hidden gems of history, don't forget to subscribe for more bedtime stories about the remarkable people time tried to forget. What other foundations of our modern world were built by hands whose names we never learned to speak? You're drifting back to ancient Mesopotamia now, where cuneiform tablets catch moonlight in a temple scriptorium as the world's first named author puts stylus to clay. In 2300 BCE, Enheduanna served as high priestess of the moon god Nana in the city of Ur, but her true immortality came through her revolutionary poetry. She composed hymns that blended personal devotion with political commentary, creating the template for all literature that would follow. Her verses praised the goddess Inanna with passionate intensity, while subtly reinforcing her father Sargon's imperial authority across Mesopotamia. For over 500 years, scribes copied her works throughout the ancient world. Yet somehow history forgot to remember the woman who invented the very concept of authorship. Archaeological discoveries have only recently restored her name to its rightful place at the beginning of all written expression. What stories might we tell differently if we remembered that literature itself was born from a woman's voice? Breathe in the scent of healing herbs as you enter an 11th century Persian library where one man's medical genius shaped healthcare across 3 continents. Abu Ali al-Hussein ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote his masterwork, The Canon of Medicine, while serving as court physician in Isfahan. This comprehensive medical encyclopedia systematically organized Greek, Roman, and Islamic medical knowledge while adding groundbreaking observations about contagious diseases, mental health, and surgical procedures. European universities used his textbook for 6 centuries, making him more influential in medieval medicine than Hippocrates himself. His precise descriptions of eye surgery, kidney stones, and diabetes treatment saved countless lives across cultures and centuries. Yet while Western medical schools barely mention his name today, his methodical approach to diagnosis and treatment established principles that modern doctors still follow. How many healing hands have been guided by wisdom we've forgotten to acknowledge? You're on the windswept steppes now, where a remarkable woman challenged every assumption about power, strength, and marriage in 13th century Mongolia. Princess Kutulan, great niece of Genghis Khan, declared that any man who wished to marry her must first defeat her in wrestling, with the stakes being 100 horses if he lost. Hundreds of suitors tried and failed, leaving Kutulan with over 10,000 horses and her freedom intact. She rode alongside her father Kaidu in military campaigns, commanding troops with tactical brilliance while remaining undefeated in personal combat. Marco Polo wrote admiringly of her prowess, yet European retellings gradually transformed her into a delicate princess saved by male heroes. The real Kutulan chose her own path, wed for love rather than politics, and proved that strength comes in forms that don't always fit traditional expectations. What other powerful women have been rewritten as helpless princesses waiting to be rescued? Sleep comes gently as you hear the soft whirring of mechanical wonders in a 12th century Mesopotamian workshop, where innovation bloomed like desert flowers after rain. Badi al-Zaman ibn al-Razaz al-Jazari crafted automata that seemed to defy the laws of nature, elephants that told time, robot servants that poured drinks, and musical ensembles powered by water flow. His book of ingenious mechanical devices documented machines with programmable features that wouldn't appear in Europe for another 300 years. Crankshafts, combination locks, and feedback control systems flowed from his brilliant mind while he served the rulers of Mesopotamia. His castle clock incorporated multiple mechanical systems working in perfect harmony, presaging the computer age by nearly a millennium. Yet textbooks rarely mention the Islamic polymath whose innovations laid groundwork for our automated world. What marvels of engineering have we attributed to later inventors, while forgetting their true creators? You're in the elegant chambers of Heian-era Japan now, where silk rustles softly as a court lady creates a literary form that will enchant readers for 1,000 years. Around 1008 CE, Lady Murasaki began writing The Tale of Genji, weaving together psychological complexity, cultural observation, and narrative sophistication that had never before appeared in world literature. Her 54-chapter masterpiece followed Prince Genji through love affairs, political intrigue, and spiritual awakening with unprecedented emotional depth. While European literature still focused on epic battles and religious allegory, Murasaki explored interior landscapes of human feeling with remarkable subtlety. Japanese nobles passed handwritten copies between households, treasuring her insights into beauty, impermanence, and the bittersweet nature of human connection. Modern scholars recognize her novel as the earliest example of psychological realism, yet her pioneering contribution to world literature remains largely unknown outside academic circles. How might our understanding of human nature have evolved differently if this feminine perspective had shaped global literary traditions? Numbers dance gently in your mind as we visit 7th century India, where a brilliant astronomer-mathematician revolutionized human understanding of nothingness itself. Brahmagupta worked in the scholarly city of Ujjain, calculating planetary motions while developing mathematical concepts that would transform civilization. His treatise, Brahmasputa Siddhanta, contained the first clear rules for computing with zero, treating it not as an empty placeholder, but as a number with its own properties and behaviors. European scholars wouldn't encounter these revolutionary ideas until the 12th century, when translations of Islamic mathematical texts finally carried Indian innovations westward. His work on negative numbers, quadratic equations, and astronomical calculations provided foundations for algebra and trigonometry. Without his systematic approach to mathematical zero, modern science, engineering, and commerce would be impossible. How many technological marvels depend on mathematical concepts we've forgotten to credit to their original creators? Gentle healing energy surrounds you now as we enter the medical school of 11th century Salerno, where a remarkable physician revolutionized healthcare for half of humanity. Trota, one of the few documented female doctors of medieval Europe, specialized in obstetrics, gynecology, and general medicine at a time when most healing was left to male physicians or untrained midwives. Her comprehensive text, The Diseases of Women, provided practical guidance on pregnancy, childbirth, contraception, and women's health issues with unprecedented medical sophistication. Students from across Europe sought her teachings, and her manual was copied and translated for centuries. Yet later copyists often attributed her work to male colleagues or anonymous sources, gradually erasing her contributions to medical knowledge. Recent scholarship has restored her authorship of texts that influenced women's health care throughout the medieval period. What other medical advances have been credited to men while women's healing wisdom was quietly forgotten? Ocean waves whisper ancient secrets as you discover the remarkable story behind Admiral Zheng He, the explorer we mentioned before, whose original identity reveals even more fascinating layers. Born Ma He in 1371 to a Muslim family in Yunnan province, he was captured as a child during Ming military campaigns and eventually rose to become one of China's most trusted naval commanders. His 7 maritime expeditions between 1405 and 1433 established Chinese diplomatic presence from Southeast Asia to the eastern coast of Africa. Islamic astronomical knowledge, learned in his youth, helped navigate these massive treasure fleets across unfamiliar waters. His Muslim faith facilitated diplomatic relations with Islamic rulers throughout the Indian Ocean, creating trade networks that might have connected East and West centuries before European colonization. When China abandoned these expeditions, they lost not just naval supremacy, but the multicultural perspectives that had made such vast undertakings possible. How different might global history have been if cultural diversity had continued to guide exploration rather than conquest? You're in a glamorous 1940s Hollywood apartment now, where starlight mingles with the glow of scientific inspiration as a beautiful actress sketches revolutionary communication technologies. Between filming romantic comedies, Hedy Lamarr spent evenings in her inventor's workshop, developing a frequency-hopping system that could prevent enemy interception of Allied torpedo guidance systems. Her secret communication system, patented with composer George Antheil in 1942, used player piano technology to rapidly switch radio frequencies, making signals virtually impossible to jam. The U.S. Navy classified her invention and didn't implement it until the 1960s, by which time the patent had expired and Lamarr received no compensation. Her frequency-hopping principle became fundamental to modern Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS technologies. Yet for decades, she remained known only as a glamorous movie star, while her scientific contributions were classified or forgotten. What other brilliant minds have been hiding behind the masks society expected them to wear? Rest peacefully now as we visit 9th century Baghdad, where a compassionate doctor's careful observations saved millions of lives across centuries and continents. Abu Bakr al-Razi, known in the West as Rhazes, distinguished between smallpox and measles for the first time in medical history, providing accurate diagnostic criteria that helped physicians treat these devastating diseases. His clinical notes described allergic reactions, documented the first known case of immunity, and established rigorous methods for medical observation that wouldn't become standard in Europe for another 500 years. He directed hospitals in Ray and Baghdad while writing over 200 medical texts, including comprehensive guides to surgery, pharmacy, and patient care. His comprehensive book on medicine became a standard reference throughout the Islamic world and medieval Europe. Yet despite his foundational contributions to medical science, his name appears rarely in modern medical education. What medical breakthroughs might we accelerate today if we remembered to learn from all of history's healing wisdom? You're in ancient Babylon now, where the scent of distilling flowers and herbs fills the air as the world's first named chemist perfects her craft. Around 1200 BCE, Taputi Belatekalim worked as perfume maker and overseer in the royal palace, but her true legacy lies in the detailed chemical processes she recorded on cuneiform tablets. She documented techniques for distillation, extraction, and sublimation that wouldn't be formally recognized as chemistry for another millennium. Her recipes combined flowers, oils, calamus, cyperus, and myrrh, using sophisticated methods involving heating, cooling, and filtration. These weren't mere cosmetic preparations, but complex chemical transformations that demonstrated deep understanding of molecular processes. Archaeological discoveries of her tablets revealed systematic experimental methods and precise measurements that established her as history's first recorded chemist, though textbooks rarely mention the Babylonian woman who founded the science of transformation. What other scientific foundations were laid by careful hands, whose names we never learned to speak? Breathe gently as you enter 12th century India, where mathematical equations flow like poetry in a scholar's peaceful study. Lilavati, daughter of the renowned mathematician Bhaskara II, possessed such extraordinary mathematical talent that her father named his famous treatise after her. But was she merely his inspiration, or did her own calculations contribute to the work that revolutionized algebra? Historical fragments suggest she solved complex problems involving arithmetic progressions, geometric series, and indeterminate equations with elegant precision. Her insights into mathematical astronomy and algebraic methods may have guided her father's most celebrated discoveries. The Lilavati treatise became a standard mathematical text across India for centuries. Yet whether the brilliant woman behind the name received credit for her own contributions remains lost to history's tendency to credit fathers rather than daughters. How many brilliant minds have been relegated to footnotes in their father's achievements rather than celebrated for their own genius? You're in the House of Wisdom in 9th century Baghdad now, where scrolls rustle softly as East and West meet in one man's tireless pursuit of knowledge. Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ishaq al-Kindi, known as the philosopher of the Arabs, translated and preserved countless Greek philosophical and scientific texts that might otherwise have been lost forever. His On First Philosophy introduced Aristotelian logic to Islamic thought, while his mathematical treatises advanced cryptography, optics, and music theory. He wrote over 260 works spanning astronomy, medicine, geography, and mathematics, creating the intellectual bridge that would later carry Greek knowledge back to medieval Europe. His systematic approach to translation and commentary established methodologies that shaped scholarship for centuries. Yet while Thomas Aquinas and other European scholars built upon foundations he laid, Al-Kindi's name rarely appears in Western philosophical curricula. What other intellectual bridges have we crossed while forgetting to thank their architects? Rest comfortably now as we discover how one ingenious invention transformed human hygiene forever, yet its creator remains virtually unknown. In 16th century Punjab, during the Mughal Empire, a court inventor named Kharbanda designed sophisticated water-sealed toilets with flushing mechanisms for Emperor Akbar's palaces. His innovations included S-trap pipes, water tanks, and drainage systems that prevented odors and contamination centuries before similar designs appeared in Europe. The Mughal court's advanced sanitation systems impressed visiting European diplomats, yet when flush toilets were invented in Elizabethan England, no credit went to the Punjabi engineer whose designs had been perfected generations earlier. British colonial historians systematically overlooked Indian technological achievements, creating narratives that positioned European innovation as unique rather than borrowed. Kharbanda's engineering genius improved countless lives while remaining invisible to historical recognition. How many other innovations have we attributed to the wrong inventors, while the true creators remained forgotten? You're in a quiet Tehran courtroom in the 1970s, where a pioneering female judge upholds justice with unwavering dedication before revolution changes everything. Shirin Ebadi became one of Iran's first female judges in 1969, presiding over cases with fairness and legal precision that earned respect from colleagues and citizens alike. When the 1979 revolution stripped women of judicial authority, she was demoted to clerical work, but refused to abandon her commitment to human rights. For decades, she defended political prisoners, women's rights activists, and persecuted minorities through her legal practice, facing constant threats and harassment. Her quiet courage in documenting abuses and challenging unjust laws laid groundwork for international human rights advocacy. Only when she received the 2003 Nobel Peace Prize did the world recognize the Iranian lawyer who had spent 30 years fighting for justice in the shadows. How many other champions of justice work tirelessly in darkness before the spotlight finally finds them? Sleep peacefully as we follow ancient trade routes with the unnamed guide who made the world's greatest journey possible. While Ibn Battuta received fame for his extensive travels, historical records hint at a brilliant navigator who planned routes, negotiated safe passage, and preserved accurate geographical knowledge throughout their 30-year odyssey. This anonymous companion possessed intimate knowledge of monsoon patterns, desert crossings, mountain passes, and diplomatic protocols across 3 continents. They spoke multiple languages, understood diverse customs, and maintained detailed notes that enabled Ibn Battuta's eventual memoirs. Without this guide's expertise in astronomy, cartography, and cultural navigation, the famous traveler's journey would have been impossible. Yet, like many essential contributors to great achievements, the navigator's name was erased by historical narratives that preferred singular heroes to collaborative triumphs. What other great achievements depended on anonymous partners whose contributions were quietly forgotten? You're walking along the Nile now, where ancient stones whisper the name of a woman who ruled Egypt 300 years before the more famous Hatshepsut claimed the throne. Around 1806 BCE, Sobekneferu became pharaoh in her own right, not as regent, but as legitimate ruler of the Middle Kingdom. Archaeological evidence shows she completed major construction projects, maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring kingdoms, and ruled for approximately 4 years during a crucial transition period. Her cartouches appear on monuments from Lower Egypt to Nubia, indicating effective control over the entire kingdom. Yet subsequent pharaohs attempted to erase her legacy, chiseling her name from monuments and excluding her from official king lists. Only modern archaeological discoveries have restored recognition to Egypt's first confirmed female pharaoh, whose successful reign proved women could rule as effectively as men centuries before such ideas became acceptable. How many other pioneering women were deliberately erased from history by successors who preferred to forget their precedents? Candlelight flickers gently in a medieval monastery where a scholarly monk develops codes that will protect secrets for centuries to come. In 15th century Germany, Abbot Johannes Trithemius combined theological study with mathematical innovation, creating the first printed work on cryptography in European history. His Polygraphiae introduced systematic methods for encoding messages using multiple cipher alphabets, techniques so advanced that governments banned his books for revealing state secrets. He developed steganography methods for hiding messages within innocent-looking texts and created mechanical devices for automated encryption. Intelligence agencies across Europe sought his expertise while simultaneously fearing the power his methods might give to enemies. His innovations laid foundation for modern cryptographic theory, yet his contributions remain known primarily to specialists rather than celebrated as fundamental to information security. What other medieval innovations continue protecting our digital communications while their creators remain forgotten? You're in the workshop of wonder now, where three Persian brothers create mechanical marvels that won't be equaled for another 600 years. The Banu Musa brothers, Ahmad, Muhammad, and Al-Hassan, served as court engineers in 9th century Baghdad, designing automated devices that amazed even the sophisticated Abbasid caliphs. Their Book of Ingenious Devices documented over 100 mechanical inventions, including programmable robot musicians, self-filling water vessels, and trick drinking cups with hidden mechanisms. They pioneered feedback control systems, automated sequential operations, and mechanical memory storage using rotating drums with pegs, concepts that wouldn't reappear until the Industrial Revolution. Their workshop became a center of mechanical innovation, where students learned precision engineering and automated control. Yet while European clockmakers of later centuries received credit for similar innovations, the Banu Musa brothers' extraordinary contributions to robotics and automation remain largely unknown. What mechanical wonders might we have achieved centuries earlier if their innovative legacy had been preserved and developed? Rest now among the clouds as we honor the unnamed master builders who created one of humanity's most enduring architectural mysteries. Around 1450 CE, teams of Inca engineers designed and constructed Machu Picchu with precision that continues to baffle modern architects. These anonymous masters carved massive stone blocks so perfectly that not even a knife blade can slip between them, all without mortar, iron tools, or wheeled vehicles. They engineered sophisticated drainage systems, earthquake-resistant foundations, and agricultural terraces that still function after 500 years. Their understanding of astronomy, geology, and hydraulics enabled construction of a mountain citadel that survived centuries of earthquakes, storms, and jungle growth. Yet while Hiram Bingham received credit for discovering the site in 1911, the brilliant engineers who planned and built this marvel remain nameless, their extraordinary achievements attributed to mysterious lost knowledge rather than documented human genius. How many other architectural marvels stand as testaments to anonymous masters whose names deserve to be remembered alongside their imperishable creations? You're in a hidden monastery workshop now, where golden paint glimmers by candlelight as a brave woman creates sacred art during history's most dangerous time for artists. In 8th century Constantinople, during the iconoclastic period when Emperor Leo III banned religious images, a nun named Theodora continued painting icons in secret. While imperial soldiers destroyed centuries of Byzantine art and persecuted icon painters as heretics, she preserved the ancient tradition of sacred imagery in underground workshops. Her delicate brushstrokes captured divine light in the eyes of saints and angels, maintaining skills that might otherwise have vanished forever. Monks smuggled her works to distant monasteries where they were hidden behind false walls and buried in crypts. When Empress Irene restored icon veneration in 787 CE, Theodora's surviving paintings helped train a new generation of artists who had forgotten these sacred techniques. How many other artistic traditions survived dark periods only because anonymous hands refused to let beauty die? Breathe slowly as we enter a 13th century Persian observatory, where mathematical precision unlocks the secrets of celestial motion. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi worked at the Marageh Observatory in Iran, developing the Tusi couple, a mathematical device that converted circular motion into linear motion using two rotating circles. This breakthrough solved the ancient problem of how planets could move in straight lines while traveling in circular orbits around Earth. His geometric model influenced Islamic astronomy for centuries, and may have inspired Copernicus's heliocentric theory through translated manuscripts that reached Renaissance Europe. The Tusi couple appears in Copernicus's work without attribution, suggesting the Polish astronomer built upon Persian foundations. Yet while Copernicus receives credit for revolutionizing astronomy, Al-Tusi's fundamental contribution to understanding planetary motion remains largely unknown outside scholarly circles. What other scientific revolutions were built upon forgotten foundations laid by earlier brilliant minds? Sleep peacefully as we journey to ancient Egypt, where healing wisdom flows like the Nile through generations of caring hands. Around 2700 BCE, Merit Ptah served as chief physician in the court of the pharaohs, making her the first named female doctor in human history. Her title was carved in stone on her son's tomb, where he proudly declared her the first among women in the healing arts. She practiced during Egypt's Old Kingdom, when medical knowledge combined empirical observation with spiritual healing, treating nobles and commoners with equal skill. Her tomb inscription suggests she trained other physicians and may have written medical texts that influenced Egyptian medicine for centuries. Yet while male physicians like Imhotep achieved legendary status, Merit Ptah's pioneering role in medicine was forgotten until modern archaeologists rediscovered her tomb and recognized the significance of her ancient title. How many other women blazed trails in healing arts while history remembered only their male contemporaries? You're in an 11th century Chinese study now, where careful observations of nature reveal secrets that won't be understood in Europe for another 400 years. Shen Kuo, a brilliant scholar official during the Song dynasty, made groundbreaking discoveries in astronomy, mathematics, geology, and physics that advanced human understanding across multiple fields. He was the first person to describe magnetic declination, the difference between magnetic north and true north, a discovery crucial for accurate navigation. His observations of lunar craters, fossilized sea creatures in mountains, and movable type printing demonstrated scientific methods centuries ahead of his time. He calculated the length of the year with remarkable precision and designed improved astronomical instruments for the Imperial Observatory. Yet while European scientists later received credit for similar discoveries, Shen Kuo's comprehensive contributions to multiple sciences remain largely unknown in Western education. What other Renaissance men lived centuries before the Renaissance, their achievements quietly forgotten by history? Candles flicker gently in a Pythagorean study where a remarkable woman explores the foundations of human nature and cosmic order. In 4th century BCE southern Italy, a Sara of Lucania wrote treatises on natural law and human psychology that influenced Greek philosophical thought for generations. Her work on human nature argued that moral principles could be discovered through reason and observation of natural patterns, anticipating concepts that wouldn't fully develop until the Enlightenment. She belonged to the Pythagorean school, where women participated equally in philosophical discussions and contributed original insights to mathematics, astronomy, and ethics. Her writings on the harmony between individual psychology and cosmic order influenced later Stoic philosophers. Yet her name gradually disappeared from philosophical texts as male voices dominated intellectual discourse. Only fragments of her work survive, hinting at sophisticated theories that challenged conventional thinking about law, nature, and human behavior. How many other philosophical foundations were laid by women whose insights were quietly absorbed while their names were forgotten? Rest comfortably as we soar through time to 9th century Cordoba, where human dreams of flight first took wing through one man's extraordinary courage and innovation. Abbas ibn Firnas, a Berber polymath in Muslim Spain, designed and tested a flying machine centuries before Leonardo da Vinci sketched his aerial designs. In 875 CE, at age 65, he strapped on wings of silk and eagle feathers, launched himself from a mountain, and glided successfully for several minutes before crash landing. His flight demonstrated that human aviation was possible with proper engineering and fearless experimentation. He also invented a water clock, developed new techniques for cutting rock crystal, and created the first corrective lenses in recorded history. Yet, while the Wright brothers achieved lasting fame for powered flight, Ibn Firnas's pioneering aviation experiments remain virtually unknown outside the Islamic world, his courage and innovation lost to most aviation histories. What other impossible dreams were first attempted by forgotten pioneers whose failures paved the way for later success? You're in the elegant high-end court now, where silk rustles softly as two brilliant women create literary masterpieces that will influence writing for 1,000 years. While Murasaki Shikibu wrote the world's first novel, her contemporary Sei Shonagon revolutionized literature through her Pillow Book, a collection of observations, lists, and diary entries that invented the personal essay form. Her witty, intimate writing style captured court life with psychological insight and aesthetic sensitivity that had never appeared in literature before. She created lists of hateful things, elegant things, and things that make one's heart beat faster, establishing literary techniques that modern writers still use. Her influence on Japanese aesthetics and literary sensibility rivals Murasaki's, yet Western literary histories often mention only the novelist, while forgetting the essayist who pioneered entirely new forms of written expression. While Murasaki Shikibu wrote the world's first novel, her contemporary Sei Shonagon revolutionized literature through her Pillow Book, a collection of observations, lists, and diary entries that invented the personal essay form. Her influence on Japanese aesthetics and literary sensibility rivals Murasaki's, yet Western literary histories often mention only the novelist while forgetting the essayist who pioneered entirely new forms of written expression. How many other literary innovations have we attributed to later writers while forgetting their true originators? Gentle tremors of discovery ripple through time as we meet a second-century genius whose inventions protected countless lives from natural disasters. Zhang Heng, court astronomer during China's Han Dynasty, created the world's first seismograph, an intricate bronze device that could detect earthquakes hundreds of miles away and indicate their direction. His elegant machine featured 8 dragons holding bronze balls that would drop into the mouths of 8 frogs below when seismic waves triggered internal mechanisms. He also built armillary spheres powered by water clocks, calculated pi to unprecedented accuracy, and wrote poetry that combined scientific observation with artistic beauty. His earthquake detector successfully predicted distant tremors for decades, yet when the technology was lost during political upheavals, no similar device appeared anywhere in the world for another 1,500 years. What other life-saving technologies were invented and lost, waiting centuries for humanity to rediscover what brilliant minds had already achieved? You're walking through ancient Athens now, where a remarkable woman challenges every convention about gender, class, and the pursuit of happiness. In 4th century BCE Greece, Hipparchia shocked society by rejecting marriage to a wealthy suitor and instead choosing philosophy and a life of voluntary poverty with the cynic philosopher Crates. She abandoned luxury, wore simple robes, lived outdoors, and engaged in public philosophical debates with the era's greatest thinkers. Her sharp wit and logical arguments earned respect from male philosophers who initially tried to dismiss her participation in intellectual discourse. She wrote philosophical treatises and letters that influenced Cynic thought for centuries, arguing that true freedom came through rejecting social expectations and material possessions. Yet, while male Cynic philosophers like Diogenes achieved lasting fame, Hipparchia's contributions to ancient philosophy were gradually forgotten as women's intellectual achievements were minimized. In 4th century BCE Greece, Hipparchia shocked society by rejecting marriage to a wealthy suitor and instead choosing philosophy and a life of voluntary poverty with the Cynic philosopher Crates. What other women chose unconventional paths to wisdom while history remembered only the men who walked similar roads? Stars twinkle overhead as we join an 11th century polymath whose precise calculations and cultural curiosity bridged civilizations across vast distances. Abu Rayhan al-Biruni working in medieval Central Asia, calculated Earth's circumference using mathematical triangulation with an accuracy that wouldn't be matched for centuries. His method involved measuring the angle to a mountain peak from two different elevations, demonstrating sophisticated understanding of trigonometry and geography. Beyond his mathematical genius, he mastered Sanskrit and spent decades studying Indian mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, creating detailed comparisons between Islamic and Hindu scientific traditions. His works on mineralogy, pharmacology, and astronomy influenced scholars across 3 continents, while his respectful approach to studying other cultures established methodologies for comparative research. Yet while European explorers received credit for discovering geographic knowledge, Al-Biruni's precise measurements and cross-cultural scholarship remain largely unknown. How many other bridges between cultures were built by scholars whose curiosity transcended the boundaries that divided their contemporaries? You're in a 15th century Venetian salon now, where elegant discussions of philosophy and literature flow like wine, while a remarkable woman argues for revolutionary ideas about learning. Cassandra Fedele became one of Europe's most celebrated humanist scholars, delivering Latin orations to packed audiences across Italy and corresponding with kings, philosophers, and church leaders. Her eloquent speeches defended women's right to education and intellectual participation, arguing that God had given equal reasoning abilities to both sexes. Universities invited her to lecture on classical literature and moral philosophy, while nobles sought her wisdom on matters of governance and ethics. Yet when Renaissance histories were written, male scholars gradually minimized her contributions, reducing her from an influential intellectual leader to a mere curiosity. Her extensive writings on education, ethics, and women's capabilities influenced generations of female scholars who followed her pioneering path. How many other educational revolutions began with voices that were later whispered into silence? Gentle gears turn rhythmically in your mind as we enter an 11th century Chinese workshop where precision engineering meets astronomical wisdom. Su Song designed and built a magnificent clock tower in Kaifeng that combined a water-powered escapement mechanism with an armillary sphere and celestial globe, creating the world's first truly mechanical clock. His ingenious device kept accurate time while automatically displaying the positions of stars, planets, and constellations throughout the year. The 40-foot tower featured bells, drums, and moving figures that announced the hours to the entire city. His detailed technical manual, New Design for an Armillary Clock, included precise drawings and instructions that preserved advanced engineering knowledge for future generations. European mechanical clocks wouldn't appear for another 200 years. Yet, Su Song's sophisticated timepiece demonstrated principles that formed the foundation of precision machinery. When the Jin dynasty conquered Kaifeng, they attempted to relocate the clock tower, but the complex mechanism was destroyed in the process. What other mechanical marvels were built and lost before their time, waiting centuries for humanity to rediscover such precision? You're walking through the gardens of ancient Cyrenaica now, where wisdom blooms under Mediterranean sunshine as students gather around a remarkable teacher. Arete of Cyrene, daughter of philosopher Aristippus, directed the Cyrenaic school of philosophy for 35 years during the 4th century BCE, training over 100 students in ethics, logic, and the art of living well. Her teachings emphasized practical wisdom and the pursuit of intelligent pleasure, arguing that true happiness came through rational understanding rather than mere sensual gratification. Ancient sources praised her as one of the most skillful teachers of her era, noting that even visiting philosophers sought her insights on complex ethical questions. She wrote over 40 books on philosophy, ethics, and education, yet only fragments survive, and her name gradually disappeared from philosophical histories as male voices dominated intellectual discourse. Her students went on to establish schools throughout the Mediterranean, spreading her influence across the ancient world. How many other philosophical traditions trace their roots to forgotten teachers whose wisdom shaped generations? Sleep peacefully as we honor the unnamed master craftsman whose hands transformed theoretical designs into working mechanical wonders. While Al-Jazari received credit for documenting ingenious devices in 12th century Mesopotamia, historical records hint at a brilliant workshop supervisor who possessed the practical engineering skills to make these complex automata actually function. This anonymous engineer understood gear ratios, hydraulic principles, and precision metalworking at levels that enabled the construction of programmable musical instruments, automated servants, and self-operating fountains. They developed innovative techniques for casting bronze components, creating waterproof seals, and calibrating timing mechanisms that kept intricate devices running smoothly for years. Without this master craftsman's ability to translate theoretical concepts into working machinery, Al-Jazari's designs would have remained merely clever drawings. Yet, like many essential collaborators in great achievements, the workshop master's name was never recorded, their expertise absorbed into their employer's legacy. What other technological breakthroughs depended on anonymous hands whose practical genius made theoretical dreams become reality? You're beside the sacred Ganges now, where ancient debates about the nature of existence flow like the eternal river, while a fearless woman questions the foundations of cosmic knowledge. In the 8th century BCE, during the composition of the Upanishads, Gargi Vachaknavi participated in the great philosophical assembly at King Janaka's court, where she engaged in profound debates with Yajnavalkya, considered the greatest sage of the age. Her penetrating questions about the ultimate nature of reality and the foundations of existence challenged even the most learned scholars, demonstrating intellectual courage that commanded respect from male philosophers who initially dismissed feminine wisdom. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad preserves her dialogues, showing how her logical arguments pushed Vedic philosophy toward deeper understanding of consciousness and cosmic principles. Her fearless inquiry into metaphysical questions helped shape one of humanity's most influential philosophical traditions, yet later commentaries gradually minimized her contributions while emphasizing male voices. How many other philosophical foundations were strengthened by questions asked by voices that history chose to quiet? Peaceful farmlands stretch before you as we discover the 14th century Chinese innovator whose mechanical genius fed millions while remaining virtually unknown. Wang Jin revolutionized agriculture by designing improved plows, seed drills, and irrigation systems that dramatically increased crop yields throughout China. His masterwork, a comprehensive agricultural encyclopedia, documented advanced farming techniques alongside detailed illustrations of mechanical devices that automated planting, harvesting, and food processing. He invented a spinning wheel for hemp fiber, improved mills for grinding grain, and developed efficient methods for large-scale food preservation. His innovations in crop rotation, soil management, and pest control helped sustain China's growing population during the Yuan dynasty. European agricultural improvements wouldn't match his techniques for another 300 years. Yet the agricultural revolution is typically credited to 18th century European inventors who may have unknowingly built upon principles Wang Jin had perfected centuries earlier. What other agricultural innovations fed civilizations while their creators remained as forgotten as scattered seeds? Candlelight dances across mathematical symbols as we enter a 12th century Fez scriptorium, where a brilliant woman explores the hidden patterns that govern numerical relationships. Fatima al-Kabaj worked alongside her father, the renowned mathematician Abu Tahir al-Kabaj, developing algebraic methods that influenced Islamic mathematical thought for centuries. Her innovations in solving complex equations and her geometric approaches to algebraic problems demonstrated mathematical insight that advanced the field beyond her father's already impressive contributions. She corresponded with mathematicians across the Islamic world, sharing discoveries about polynomial equations and geometric proofs that wouldn't appear in European mathematics for another 200 years. Her work on mathematical astronomy helped improve calendar calculations and navigation methods used throughout North Africa and Islamic Spain. Yet when her mathematical treatises were copied and translated, scribes often attributed her discoveries to male colleagues, gradually erasing her contributions from mathematical history. How many other mathematical breakthroughs were achieved by minds whose gender made their genius invisible to history? You're in the healing chambers of ancient Persia now, where the scent of medicinal herbs mingles with diplomatic intrigue as a Greek doctor becomes the most trusted physician in the known world. In the 6th century BCE, Democedes practiced medicine with such skill that he was summoned to treat Persian King Darius I after court physicians had failed to heal the monarch's injured foot. His successful treatment using Greek medical techniques earned him a position as chief physician to the Persian court, where he treated members of the royal family and trained Persian doctors in advanced healing methods. His salary exceeded that of any other court official, reflecting his extraordinary value to Persian rulers who prized his medical knowledge above military generals or administrative advisors. When he eventually returned to Greece, he brought with him Persian medical knowledge that enriched Greek healing traditions. Yet while Hippocrates achieved lasting fame, Democedes' pioneering role in cross-cultural medical exchange was gradually forgotten. What other bridges between civilizations were built by healers whose skills transcended political boundaries? Rest in the quiet of a 6th century Chinese study where literary genius flows like calligraphy ink across silk scrolls. Liu Xi wrote, "The Literary Mind and the Carving of Dragons," the most comprehensive theory of literature ever produced in ancient China, analyzing everything from poetry and prose to the psychological processes of creative writing. His systematic examination of literary techniques, aesthetic principles, and the relationship between form and content established critical methodologies that influenced Chinese literature for over a millennium. He categorized different types of writing, analyzed the emotional effects of various stylistic choices, and explored how great literature achieves its power to move human hearts and minds. His work provided the theoretical foundation for Chinese literary criticism and influenced writers, scholars, and poets throughout East Asia. Yet while Western literary theory is traced to Aristotle's Poetics, Liu Xi's more comprehensive and systematic analysis of literature remains largely unknown outside Chinese literary circles. What other comprehensive theories of human expression were developed in isolation, their insights waiting for global recognition? Moonlight illuminates ancient Damascus as we discover a 15th century mystic whose spiritual insights and prolific writing influenced Islamic thought across the Ottoman Empire. Aisha al-Ba'uniyya composed over 25 books on Sufism, theology, and mystical experience, making her one of the most productive female religious writers in Islamic history. Her works included poetry, theological treatises, and guides to spiritual practice that demonstrated profound understanding of Islamic mysticism and jurisprudence. She led a women's religious circle in Damascus, teaching other women advanced theological concepts and mystical techniques typically reserved for male scholars. Her writings on divine love, spiritual purification, and the mystical path attracted readers throughout Syria, Egypt, and Anatolia, influencing both male and female religious thinkers. Despite her significant contributions to Islamic thought and her recognition by contemporary scholars, later historical accounts minimized her achievements, and many of her works were lost or misattributed to male authors. How many other spiritual teachers illuminated countless souls while their own light was dimmed by historical forgetting? You're in a misty German valley now, where healing herbs grow in carefully tended gardens, as a wise abbess develops remedies that will save countless lives. In 12th century Rhineland, Bertha of Bingen established medicinal gardens and compiled extensive knowledge about plant-based healing that predated modern pharmacology by 800 years. Her systematic documentation of herbal properties, dosages, and preparation methods created the foundation for European botanical medicine. Monks and nuns from across the continent sought her training in medicinal plant cultivation and preparation techniques that combined empirical observation with spiritual healing practices. What other healing wisdom grew quietly in monastery gardens while the world forgot to remember its cultivators? Gentle starlight guides you to 8th century China, where a brilliant astronomer charts celestial territories unknown to Northern Hemisphere observers. Ma Yizhe traveled to Vietnam and Indonesia, becoming the first Chinese astronomer to systematically observe and map the southern stars invisible from mainland China. His detailed star catalogs and constellation charts expanded Chinese astronomical knowledge beyond traditional boundaries, documenting stellar patterns that wouldn't be formally studied by European astronomers for another millennium. His voyage journals combined precise astronomical observations with cultural descriptions of Southeast Asian civilizations. How many other explorers of the cosmos expanded our knowledge while remaining invisible to historical memory? You're in the golden halls of Constantinople now, where parchment rustles softly as ancient Greek texts find new life through one woman's dedication to preserving knowledge. In 12th century Byzantium, Princess Theodora Komnenos sponsored the translation and preservation of scientific manuscripts that might otherwise have been lost during political upheavals. Her scriptoriums employed dozens of scholars who copied works on mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and natural philosophy, creating libraries that preserved classical knowledge for future generations. Her patronage enabled the survival of scientific texts that would later influence both Islamic and Renaissance scholars. What other treasures of human knowledge survived dark periods only because someone refused to let wisdom die? Sleep peacefully among Moorish gardens, where a 13th century scholar transforms botanical knowledge through systematic observation and documentation. Ibn al-Baytar traveled across the Mediterranean collecting, testing, and cataloging medicinal plants with unprecedented scientific rigor. His comprehensive pharmacological encyclopedia described 1,400 plants, minerals, and animal products, documenting their therapeutic properties and preparation methods. European physicians relied on his work for centuries, yet his contributions to botanical science and medical pharmacology remain largely unknown outside specialized academic circles. How many other comprehensive catalogs of natural wisdom were compiled by forgotten hands in distant gardens? Ocean waves whisper revolutionary songs as you discover an 18th century woman who commanded her own fleet against impossible odds. Lascarina, Bubulina built and equipped warships using her merchant fortune, leading naval operations during early Greek independence movements. Her strategic brilliance and fearless leadership inspired other resistance leaders, while her ships disrupted Ottoman supply lines throughout the Aegean. Though she achieved legendary status in Greek folklore, international histories rarely mention the female admiral whose maritime expertise helped lay groundwork for eventual Greek independence. What other naval victories were won by commanders whose gender made their achievements invisible to wider historical recognition? You're in a 12th century monastery library where East meets West through one man's dedication to cross-cultural learning. Adelard of Bath traveled throughout the Islamic world, mastering Arabic and translating crucial scientific texts that introduced European scholars to advanced mathematics, astronomy, and natural philosophy. His translations of Euclid's Elements and Al-Khwarizmi's astronomical tables sparked the mathematical renaissance that transformed European intellectual life. His detailed accounts of Islamic scientific methods challenged European scholars to abandon superstition for empirical observation. How many other intellectual bridges connected distant civilizations while their builders remained forgotten footnotes in history? You're standing on medieval ramparts now, where a determined woman leads the defense of her city with courage that inspires an entire population. During the 1573 siege of Haarlem, Canal Siemens Dr. Hasselaer organized civilian resistance against Spanish forces, leading groups of women in combat operations that prolonged the city's defense for 7 months. Her strategic planning and fearless leadership became legendary throughout the Dutch provinces, inspiring other cities to resist Spanish occupation. Though Dutch folklore celebrates her heroism, international histories rarely acknowledge the female commander whose tactical skills delayed Spanish conquest. What other defensive victories depended on forgotten leaders whose courage kept hope alive during dark times? Numbers dance peacefully in your mind as we meet a 13th century Chinese scholar whose mathematical insights wouldn't be recognized in Europe for another 300 years. Yang Hui worked systematically with triangular arrays of numbers, discovering mathematical relationships that enabled advanced calculations in algebra and combinatorics. His Yanghui triangle preceded Pascal's famous triangle by centuries, while his innovative methods for solving polynomial equations influenced Chinese mathematics for generations. European mathematicians later rediscovered his techniques without knowing about his foundational contributions to mathematical theory. How many other mathematical discoveries were made and forgotten, waiting centuries for the world to recognize their significance? Candlelight flickers gently as we honor a 14th century woman whose spiritual insights challenged religious orthodoxy through radical ideas about divine union. Marguerite Porete wrote The Mirror of Simple Souls, a mystical text that explored the soul's journey toward complete unity with divine love. Her sophisticated theological arguments and poetic descriptions of mystical experience influenced medieval spirituality throughout Europe. Though church authorities condemned her work and ultimately executed her for heresy, her ideas continued spreading through underground networks of spiritual seekers who preserved her revolutionary insights about divine love. What other spiritual wisdom was deemed too dangerous for its time, surviving only through whispered teachings and hidden manuscripts? Stars align peacefully overhead as we discover a 6th century mathematician whose precise calculations governed time itself for over 1,000 years. Liu Chuo developed the Daming calendar, correcting astronomical errors that had accumulated over centuries of Chinese timekeeping. His accurate measurements of the solar year and lunar cycles enabled precise prediction of eclipses, seasonal changes, and agricultural timing throughout the Chinese Empire. His calendar system remained the standard for Chinese civilization for over 300 years, demonstrating mathematical precision that European astronomers wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance era. How many other masters of time and precision worked in silent dedication while their calculations governed the daily lives of millions? You're in a peaceful Chinese garden now, where ink flows like water across silk, as a remarkable woman transforms simple plants into profound artistic expression. In 14th century China, Guan Daosheng became the most celebrated female painter of her era, mastering bamboo painting with such grace that her works were treasured by emperors and scholars alike. Her delicate brushstrokes captured the essence of swaying bamboo with spiritual depth that combined Zen philosophy with technical mastery. She was the first woman whose paintings were included in imperial collections, yet later art historians often overlooked her contributions while celebrating male contemporaries. What other artistic innovations bloomed quietly in forgotten gardens while the world failed to record their creators? Gentle monastery bells echo through time as we meet a 13th century chronicler whose careful observations preserved countless stories of wonder and faith. Caesarius of Heisterbach compiled Dialogus Miraculorum, documenting over 700 miraculous events with the precision of a modern anthropologist. His detailed accounts of medieval religious life, local customs, and supernatural beliefs provide historians with invaluable insights into how ordinary people understood their world. His systematic approach to recording testimony and verifying sources established methodologies that influenced later historical writing throughout Europe. How many other careful observers documented their times while remaining invisible to the recognition they deserved? Stars shimmer peacefully overhead as you discover a 10th century scholar whose stellar observations guided navigation for nearly 1,000 years. Abd al-Rahman al-Sufi created the most comprehensive star catalog of the medieval period, documenting over 1,000 stars with unprecedented accuracy. His Book of Fixed Stars included detailed drawings of constellations, magnitude measurements, and positional coordinates that remained the astronomical standard throughout the Islamic world and medieval Europe. His work preserved and corrected ancient Greek astronomical knowledge while adding original observations that wouldn't be superseded until the telescope era. What other mappers of the cosmos worked in patient solitude while their charts guided countless journeys across unknown territories? Candlelight dances across medieval pages where a 13th century woman pioneers religious writing in the common tongue. Mechthild of Magdeburg composed The Flowing Light of the Godhead, one of the first major mystical works written in German rather than Latin. Her passionate descriptions of divine love and spiritual ecstasy influenced medieval mysticism throughout Northern Europe. She dared to criticize church corruption while celebrating the direct relationship between the soul and God, making religious wisdom accessible to ordinary people who couldn't read Latin scholarly texts. How many other spiritual pioneers made sacred wisdom available to common people while learned authorities preferred exclusive knowledge? You're beside a moonlit lake now, where elegant verses flow like ripples across water as China's greatest female poet creates literary forms that will endure for centuries. Li Qingzhao mastered both traditional and innovative poetic styles during the 12th century, becoming the most celebrated woman poet in Chinese literary history. Her emotionally intense works explored themes of love, loss, and political upheaval with unprecedented psychological depth. She also wrote influential literary criticism that established new standards for evaluating poetry. Yet her theoretical contributions are often overshadowed by focus on her personal verse. What other literary revolutionaries shaped entire artistic traditions while being remembered primarily for their personal rather than theoretical achievements? You're in a 10th century monastery school where East meets West through one brilliant teacher's dedication to cross-cultural learning. Gerbert of Aurillac studied in Islamic Spain, mastering Arabic mathematics and astronomy before becoming Pope Sylvester II. He introduced the abacus, Arabic numerals, and advanced computational methods to European education, revolutionizing medieval mathematics centuries before the Renaissance. His teaching methods and scholarly approach established educational reforms that transformed European intellectual life, yet his mathematical contributions are often forgotten in favor of his papal legacy. How many other educational revolutionaries quietly planted seeds of knowledge that bloomed into later intellectual flowering? Gentle dawn light illuminates medieval Seville, where a 12th century scholar challenges astronomical authorities with careful observations and mathematical precision. Jabir ibn Afla wrote Isla al-Majisti, correction of the Almagest, systematically identifying and correcting errors in Ptolemy's astronomical theories that had gone unquestioned for nearly 1,000 years. His innovative use of spherical trigonometry and observational techniques improved astronomical calculations throughout the Islamic world. European astronomers later built upon his corrections, yet few recognized the Andalusian scholar whose work enabled their achievements. What other scientific foundations were quietly corrected by forgotten scholars whose precision enabled later discoveries? You're in the golden corridors of Constantinople, where a remarkable woman guides an empire through diplomatic skill and administrative genius. In 11th century Byzantium, Anna Damascena served as de facto ruler while her son Alexios I focused on military campaigns. Her shrewd political management, financial reforms, and diplomatic negotiations maintained Byzantine stability during crucial decades of challenge from both East and West. Contemporary chroniclers praised her wisdom and effectiveness, yet later histories often minimize her contributions while emphasizing her son's military achievements. How many other empires were skillfully managed by women whose political genius operated through unofficial channels? Numbers dance peacefully in your mind as we honor a 5th-century genius whose mathematical precision wouldn't be matched for another 1,000 years. Zhu Chongji calculated pi to 3.1415926, achieving accuracy that European mathematicians wouldn't reach until the 16th century. His innovative mathematical methods and astronomical calculations improved Chinese calendar systems, while his engineering projects demonstrated practical applications of theoretical mathematics. His son continued his mathematical work, yet the family's extraordinary contributions to mathematics and astronomy remain largely unknown outside China. What other mathematical pioneers achieved impossible precision while working in isolation from global mathematical communities? You're in a 10th-century convent where Latin verses take dramatic form as a brilliant nun creates the first known plays written by a woman in Western literature. Roswitha of Gandersheim composed 6 plays that adapted classical dramatic forms to Christian themes, creating sophisticated theatrical works that demonstrated remarkable literary skill. Her comedies and dramas provided alternatives to pagan classical literature, while pioneering dramatic techniques that influenced medieval theater throughout Europe. She was celebrated by contemporary scholars, yet later literary histories often overlook her foundational contributions to European drama. How many other literary pioneers created entire genres while their innovations were absorbed into traditions that forgot their origins? You're in the healing halls of 11th century Salerno now, where the Mediterranean breeze carries the scent of medicinal herbs as a remarkable woman transforms healthcare for half of humanity. Trotula de Ruggiero, working at Europe's most advanced medical school, wrote comprehensive treatises on gynecology, obstetrics, and women's health that challenged centuries of medical ignorance and superstition. Her detailed knowledge of anatomy, surgical procedures, and pharmaceutical preparations demonstrated scientific rigor that wouldn't become standard elsewhere for centuries. She pioneered pain relief techniques for childbirth, developed treatments for infertility, and documented women's health conditions with unprecedented medical precision. Students from across Europe sought her teachings, while her medical texts were copied and translated throughout the medieval world. Yet later, medical historians often attributed her innovations to male colleagues or dismissed her contributions as folklore rather than legitimate medical science. What other healing wisdom was diminished simply because it flowed from women's hands and minds? Gentle fountains whisper mathematical secrets in an 11th century Zaragoza palace, where a philosopher king balances governance with geometric discovery. Yusuf al-Muhtaman ibn Hud ruled the Taifa of Zaragoza while pursuing advanced mathematical research that produced groundbreaking work in geometry and number theory. His treatise, Kitab al-Istiqmal, Book of Perfection, contained original theorems and proofs that advanced Islamic mathematics beyond previous achievements. He solved complex geometric problems, developed new methods for calculating areas and volumes, and explored mathematical relationships that influenced scholars throughout Al-Andalus. His court became a center of mathematical learning, where scholars from across the Islamic world gathered to exchange ideas and refine theoretical knowledge. When Christian forces conquered Zaragoza, many of his mathematical manuscripts were lost or destroyed, taking with them innovations that might have accelerated mathematical development throughout medieval Europe. How many other royal scholars combined political leadership with intellectual achievement, while their mathematical legacy disappeared with their kingdoms? Candlelight dances across parchment in a 14th century Parisian scriptorium, where a widowed mother becomes Europe's first professional female writer. Christine de Pizan supported her family through her pen, creating poetry, political treatises, and philosophical works that challenged medieval assumptions about women's capabilities. Her masterwork, the Book of the City of Ladies, presented systematic arguments for women's intellectual equality, citing historical examples of female achievement in scholarship, governance, and moral leadership. She engaged in public literary debates with male intellectuals, defending women's rationality and educational potential with logical precision that commanded respect from contemporary scholars. Her writings influenced Renaissance humanism and early feminist thought, yet literary histories often minimize her contributions while emphasizing male writers who built upon foundations she had established. How many other intellectual revolutions began with voices that challenged assumptions about who possessed the right to think and speak? You're in a 13th century Pizan counting house now, where revolutionary numerical symbols transform European commerce and computation forever. Leonardo Pisano, known as Fibonacci, traveled extensively through North Africa and the Middle East, learning advanced mathematical techniques from Islamic scholars who had preserved and developed ancient Indian numerical methods. His Liber Abaci introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals and decimal notation to European mathematics, demonstrating their superiority over Roman numerals for complex calculations. His famous sequence of numbers revealed mathematical patterns that appear throughout nature, from flower petals to nautilus shells. European merchants quickly adopted his numerical methods, revolutionizing trade and banking throughout the continent. Yet while his mathematical contributions transformed European intellectual life, few recognize the cultural bridge building that enabled this mathematical revolution. What other mathematical transformations depended on scholars who carried knowledge across cultural boundaries rather than creating it in isolation? Stars align peacefully overhead as we discover a 10th century Egyptian scholar whose precise observations revolutionized astronomical measurement and timekeeping. Ibn Yunus worked at the Fatimid Observatory in Cairo, conducting systematic astronomical observations that achieved unprecedented accuracy in measuring planetary positions and eclipse timing. He pioneered the use of pendulums for precise time measurement, enabling astronomical calculations with precision that wouldn't be matched for centuries. His comprehensive astronomical tables corrected errors in previous works while documenting over 40 years of careful celestial observations. His innovations in mathematical astronomy influenced scholars throughout the Islamic world and eventually reached medieval Europe through translated texts. European astronomers later built upon his methods without fully recognizing the Egyptian scholar whose patient observations had established new standards for astronomical precision. How many other foundations of scientific precision were laid by forgotten observers whose decades of careful work enabled later discoveries? You're walking ancient roads now, where the dust of centuries carries echoes of a remarkable woman's journey across the early Christian world. Egeria, a Spanish pilgrim of the 4th century, traveled throughout the Holy Land, Egypt, and Asia Minor, documenting religious sites, liturgical practices, and local customs with the precision of a modern anthropologist. Her detailed travel diary, Itinerarium Egeriae, provides historians with invaluable insights into early Christian worship, monastic life, and the geography of the late Roman Empire. She described religious ceremonies, interviewed local clergy, and recorded architectural details of churches and monasteries with systematic thoroughness. Her account influenced later pilgrimage routes and religious practices throughout medieval Europe, yet her identity remained uncertain until modern scholarship recognized her extraordinary contribution to early Christian historical documentation. What other careful observers documented their worlds with precision that preserved entire cultures for later understanding? Gentle scribal sounds fill a 9th century Baghdad translation center where a family of scholars rescues ancient wisdom from the darkness of forgetting. The Banu Qurra, a family of Christian translators working in the Abbasid House of Wisdom, rendered crucial Greek philosophical and scientific texts into Arabic, preserving works that might otherwise have been lost forever. Their translations of Aristotle, Galen, and Ptolemy became the foundation for Islamic philosophy and science while maintaining the intellectual heritage of classical antiquity. They developed sophisticated translation techniques that captured not just literal meaning, but philosophical nuance, enabling Islamic scholars to engage with Greek thought at the deepest levels. Their careful preservation work created the textual foundation that would later enable the European rediscovery of classical learning during the Renaissance period. How many other intellectual rescues saved humanity's accumulated wisdom while the rescuers remained anonymous servants of knowledge? You're in the scholarly chambers of 12th century Constantinople, where a remarkable princess creates one of medieval history's most sophisticated historical narratives. Anna Komnenos, daughter of Emperor Alexios I, wrote the Alexiad, a comprehensive account of her father's reign that demonstrates exceptional historical methodology and literary skill. Her detailed descriptions of Byzantine politics, military strategy, and diplomatic relations provide historians with unparalleled insights into medieval statecraft and court life. She consulted multiple sources, interviewed participants in historical events, and applied critical analysis to conflicting accounts with scholarly rigor that anticipated modern historical methods. Her work influenced Byzantine historiography for centuries. Yet later historical traditions often dismissed her achievements as partisan biography rather than serious historical scholarship. What other historical voices were silenced by assumptions about who possessed the authority to interpret the past? Peaceful desert nights reveal celestial secrets to a 9th century scholar whose precise observations corrected humanity's understanding of time itself. Al-Battani, working in northern Mesopotamia, conducted astronomical observations over several decades that achieved remarkable accuracy in measuring the length of the solar year. His calculations corrected Ptolemy's estimates and provided the foundation for later calendar reforms throughout both the Islamic and Christian worlds. He accurately determined the obliquity of the ecliptic, improved measurements of planetary positions, and documented precession of the equinoxes with mathematical precision. His astronomical tables influenced European astronomy through Latin translations, yet his fundamental contributions to calendrical science remain largely unknown outside specialist circles. How many other patient observers refined humanity's relationship with time while their names were lost to the very time they helped measure? You're in an ancient Greek healing sanctuary now, where women's wisdom about birth and life flows from teacher to student across generations of caring hands. Olympias of Thebes, a master midwife of the 5th century BCE, trained the young Hippocrates in the practical arts of medicine, childbirth, and herbal healing that formed the foundation of his later theoretical work. Her comprehensive knowledge of anatomy, pharmacology, and surgical techniques came from decades of attending births and treating women's health conditions throughout Greece. She understood infection control, pain management, and emergency procedures that saved countless mothers and children. Her teachings influenced the development of Greek medical theory, yet medical histories typically credit only her famous student while forgetting the woman whose practical wisdom shaped the father of medicine. What other foundations of learning were built by teachers whose knowledge was absorbed into their students' fame, while their own contributions were forgotten? You're in a snow-covered Chinese pavilion now, where elegant verses flow like winter wind as a remarkable woman creates poetry that will echo through centuries. Xie Daoyun, living in 4th century China during the Eastern Jin dynasty, became renowned for her brilliant impromptu verses and sophisticated literary criticism that influenced Chinese poetry for generations. When her uncle challenged family members to describe falling snow, her metaphor comparing snowflakes to catkins floating in the wind became legendary for its delicate precision and visual beauty. She participated in literary salons where scholars competed in verse composition, consistently demonstrating poetic insight that earned admiration from the era's greatest writers. Her quick wit and literary knowledge made her a celebrated figure in aristocratic circles. Yet later literary histories often reduced her to a footnote about clever women rather than recognizing her substantial contributions to Chinese poetic tradition. What other poetic innovations bloomed quietly in literary gardens while history forgot to tend their memory? Gentle bells chime across medieval Europe, as we discover a 10th century woman whose political wisdom guided an empire through decades of turbulent change. Adelheid of Burgundy served as regent and advisor during 3 successive reigns, demonstrating diplomatic skill that maintained stability throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Her marriage negotiations, territorial agreements, and ecclesiastical policies shaped European politics for generations, while her careful management of court rivalries prevented numerous potential conflicts. She founded monasteries, supported scholarship, and promoted trade relationships that strengthened imperial power across Central Europe. Contemporary chroniclers praised her wisdom and effectiveness, noting how her counsel prevented wars and fostered prosperity throughout the realm. Yet, medieval histories often minimize her political achievements while emphasizing her role as wife and mother, rather than recognizing her as one of the most influential stateswomen of her era. How many other empires were skillfully guided by women whose political genius operated through the shadows of official power? Time flows peacefully in a 14th century Syrian workshop, where mechanical precision meets celestial observation, as a master craftsman transforms humanity's understanding of planetary motion. Ibn al-Shatir worked as chief muezzin and astronomer in Damascus, designing innovative astronomical models that eliminated the mathematical inconsistencies in Ptolemaic astronomy that had puzzled scholars for over a millennium. His geometric devices for describing planetary motion used uniform circular motion to explain celestial mechanics with unprecedented mathematical elegance. His astronomical theories influenced Islamic science throughout the late medieval period, and may have inspired Copernicus's later heliocentric model through transmitted manuscripts. He also designed sophisticated mechanical clocks and astrolabes that demonstrated practical applications of his theoretical innovations. Yet while Copernicus achieved lasting fame for revolutionizing astronomy, Ibn al-Shatir's foundational contributions to understanding planetary motion remain largely unknown outside specialist historical circles. What other astronomical foundations were laid by forgotten observers, whose precision enabled later revolutionary discoveries? You're standing on Italian battlements now, where a determined woman leads military campaigns with strategic brilliance that reshapes the balance of medieval European power. Matilda of Tuscany commanded her own armies during the 11th and 12th centuries, successfully defending papal territories against Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV in conflicts that determined the relationship between church and imperial authority for centuries. Her military victories at crucial battles demonstrated tactical expertise that earned respect from seasoned commanders throughout Europe. She controlled vast territories across northern Italy, managed complex alliances with popes and emperors, and funded cultural projects that supported scholarship and artistic development. Contemporary sources praised her courage, intelligence, and political acumen, yet later military histories often overlook her achievements while focusing on male commanders who fought similar campaigns with less strategic success. How many other military victories were won by commanders whose gender made their tactical brilliance invisible to historical memory? Stars twinkle overhead as we meet an 11th century scholar whose mathematical precision and poetic beauty combined to create lasting contributions to both science and literature. Omar Khayyam worked as court mathematician in Persia, calculating the length of the solar year with such accuracy that his calendar system was more precise than the Gregorian calendar adopted in Europe centuries later. His algebraic innovations included systematic methods for solving cubic equations and geometric proofs that advanced mathematical theory throughout the Islamic world. Yet he achieved greater fame for his philosophical poetry, particularly his Rubaiyat, which explored themes of mortality, love, and the fleeting nature of existence with profound beauty. His verses influenced Persian literature for centuries, while his mathematical contributions provided foundations for later astronomical calculations. Western readers know him primarily as a poet, often unaware of the scientific genius that informed his artistic vision. What other Renaissance minds combined mathematical precision with poetic insight, while history remembered only half their genius? Candlelight illuminates a 12th century convent, where one of medieval Europe's most brilliant minds explores questions of love, morality, and intellectual freedom through passionate correspondence. Héloïse d'Argenteuil demonstrated exceptional scholarly ability from childhood, mastering Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, while developing philosophical arguments that challenged conventional religious and social thinking. Her famous correspondence with Peter Abelard reveals sophisticated theological reasoning and ethical analysis that influenced medieval philosophical discourse. She argued for intellectual freedom, questioned traditional marriage conventions, and developed nuanced positions on religious authority that anticipated later humanist thought. As abbess of the Paraclete, she implemented educational reforms that emphasized classical learning and critical thinking. Yet literary traditions often reduce her to a romantic figure rather than recognizing her substantial contributions to medieval philosophy and educational theory. How many other intellectual revolutionaries were remembered for their personal relationships rather than their scholarly achievements? You're in a 17th century Parisian monastery where letters flow like prayers across Europe as a humble friar creates the first international scientific network. Father Marin Mersenne corresponded with virtually every major scientist and mathematician of his era, facilitating intellectual exchange between scholars who might never have encountered each other's work. His careful translations, detailed summaries, and thoughtful critiques helped Galileo, Descartes, Pascal, and dozens of other thinkers refine their theories through collaborative discussion. He organized informal scientific conferences, published important mathematical works, and served as a trusted intermediary who shared discoveries across national and religious boundaries. His network enabled rapid circulation of scientific ideas throughout Europe during the crucial period when modern science was emerging. Yet while the scientists he connected achieved lasting fame, Mersenne's essential role in fostering scientific collaboration remains largely unknown outside historical scholarship. What other intellectual networks were carefully tended by forgotten facilitators whose connections enabled breakthrough discoveries? Gentle brush strokes whisper across silk as we honor a first-century Chinese scholar whose historical writing shaped how an entire civilization understood its past. Ban Zhao completed the Book of Han, one of China's most important historical texts, after her brother's death left the massive project unfinished. Her systematic approach to historical documentation, careful source evaluation, and sophisticated narrative techniques established methodologies that influenced Chinese historiography for over 2 millennia. She also wrote Lessons for Women, exploring women's education and social roles with nuanced arguments that balanced traditional expectations with advocacy for female learning. Her historical work provided the foundation for understanding Han Dynasty politics, culture, and social development. Yet many later histories credited the work primarily to her male relatives rather than acknowledging her substantial scholarly contributions. How many other comprehensive historical narratives were shaped by forgotten scholars whose careful documentation preserved entire civilizations? Numbers dance peacefully in your mind as we meet an 11th century scholar whose mathematical innovations provided foundations for centuries of algebraic development. Al-Karki worked in Baghdad during the height of the Islamic Golden Age, developing systematic methods for solving algebraic equations that advanced mathematics far beyond previous achievements. His treatises on algebra included the first complete description of algebraic operations, methods for extracting roots, and techniques for manipulating algebraic expressions that became standard throughout the Islamic world. He also made significant contributions to arithmetic and number theory, including early work on mathematical induction that wouldn't appear in European mathematics for centuries. His mathematical methods influenced scholars throughout the medieval Islamic world and eventually reached Europe through translated texts. Yet while European algebraists later achieved fame for similar discoveries, Al-Karki's foundational contributions to algebraic theory remain largely unknown outside mathematical history. What other mathematical foundations were carefully laid by forgotten minds whose systematic thinking enabled later algebraic revolutions? You're in the fading light of Byzantine Constantinople, where a determined woman saves ancient wisdom from the approaching darkness of empire's end. Theodora Cantacuzénos, working during the 14th century decline of the Byzantine Empire, devoted her life to copying and preserving classical Greek manuscripts that might otherwise have been lost during the political upheavals that preceded Constantinople's fall. Her scriptorium employed skilled scribes who created meticulous copies of philosophical, scientific, and literary texts that preserved ancient knowledge for future generations. She corresponded with Italian humanist scholars, facilitating the transfer of Greek learning to Western Europe that would fuel the Renaissance. Her careful preservation work ensured the survival of crucial classical texts that shaped European intellectual development for centuries. Yet while Renaissance humanists achieved fame for rediscovering classical wisdom, Theodora's essential role in preserving these texts during Byzantium's final century remains largely forgotten. How many other guardians of wisdom worked quietly in history's margins while civilizations crumbled around their patient preservation efforts? You're traveling ancient caravan routes now, where diplomatic pouches carry impossible dreams across continents as a remarkable ambassador attempts to reshape world history. Rabban Sauma, a Nestorian Christian monk born in Khanbaliq, Beijing, journeyed westward in the 13th century on what began as a pilgrimage to Jerusalem but transformed into one of history's most significant diplomatic missions. The Mongol Ilkhan sent him as an ambassador to European courts, seeking military alliances against common enemies in the Mamluk Sultanate. This Chinese-born Christian monk met with the Pope in Rome, the King of France, and English nobles, conducting delicate negotiations in Latin while wearing Mongol diplomatic robes. His mission demonstrated that sophisticated international diplomacy was possible across vast cultural and religious differences. Though his efforts ultimately failed to achieve the grand military alliance envisioned, his journey proved that understanding and cooperation could bridge any distance between civilizations. What other diplomatic bridges might have connected East and West if political circumstances had aligned with visionary ambitions? Stars align peacefully overhead as we meet an 11th century scholar whose precise calculations guided navigation and calendar making across 3 continents for over 400 years. Al-Zarqali worked in Muslim Toledo, creating the Toledan tables that provided the most accurate astronomical data available to medieval astronomers, astrologers, and navigators throughout Europe, Africa, and Asia. And his measurements of planetary positions, solar year length, and stellar coordinates achieved unprecedented precision that wouldn't be surpassed until the telescopic era. Christian scholars translated his work immediately after the Reconquista, making his tables the foundation for European astronomical calculation through the Renaissance period. His accurate determination of the solar year's length corrected centuries of calendrical errors, while his star catalogs enabled safe navigation across Mediterranean and Atlantic waters. Yet while Ptolemy achieved lasting fame for less accurate ancient astronomy, Al-Zarqali's superior medieval observations remain largely unknown outside specialist historical circles. How many other scientific foundations supported centuries of human progress, while their creators remained invisible to the recognition they deserved? You're in the elegant shadows of 11th century Japanese court life, where silk rustles softly as a sensitive observer records the subtle beauty of a disappearing civilization. Lady Sarashina wrote, "As I crossed a bridge of dreams," one of Japanese literature's most poignant memoirs, documenting her travels, spiritual seeking, and observations of Heian court culture with exceptional literary grace. Her diary reveals the inner life of a medieval Japanese woman with psychological depth rarely found in historical sources from any culture. She described pilgrimages to sacred temples, encounters with Buddhist monks, and her passion for reading romantic literature with sensitivity that bridges centuries of cultural difference. Her work provides historians with invaluable insights into the daily life, spiritual practices, and aesthetic values of Heian Japan during its cultural golden age. Yet, while male courtiers of her era achieved literary immortality, Lady Sarashina's extraordinary memoir remains largely unknown outside Japanese literary scholarship. What other intimate portraits of lost worlds survive in forgotten diaries written by observers whose sensitivity captured what official histories missed? Gentle monastery bells chime across time as we honor a 13th century English scholar whose astronomical textbook shaped European understanding of the cosmos for over 300 years. Johannes de Sacrobosco wrote De Sphera Mundi, on the sphere of the world, a comprehensive introduction to astronomy that became the standard textbook in European universities throughout the late medieval and early Renaissance periods. His clear explanations of celestial mechanics, planetary motion, and geographical concepts made complex astronomical knowledge accessible to students across the continent. The book underwent hundreds of manuscript copies and early printed editions, influencing everyone from Christopher Columbus to Galileo Galilei. His systematic approach to astronomical education established pedagogical methods that shaped how Europeans learned about their place in the universe. Yet despite his textbook's extraordinary influence on European intellectual development, Sacrobosco's name remains largely forgotten, while his students' later discoveries achieved lasting fame. How many other educational foundations enabled breakthrough discoveries while their patient teachers remained anonymous servants of learning? Desert winds whisper tales of leadership as we discover an 11th century woman whose political genius unified fractured Berber tribes into a powerful confederation that reshaped North African history. Zainab al-Nafsawiya ruled various Berber territories through strategic marriages and diplomatic alliances, demonstrating remarkable ability to navigate complex tribal politics while maintaining her own independent authority. Her marriages to successive Almoravid leaders enabled the consolidation of Berber power that would eventually control territories from Senegal to Spain. She advised military commanders, mediated tribal disputes, and managed trade relationships that brought prosperity to previously warring communities. Contemporary Arabic sources praised her wisdom and political acumen, noting how her counsel prevented internal conflicts that might have weakened Berber resistance to external threats. Yet while male military leaders achieved historical prominence, Zainab's foundational role in creating Berber political unity remains largely unknown outside specialized studies of medieval African history. What other political unifications were achieved by forgotten leaders whose diplomatic skills created the stability that enabled later military successes? You're in a vast imperial library where scrolls stretch endlessly as a dedicated scholar creates the first comprehensive catalog of Chinese literary heritage. Liu Xin, working during the early 1st century CE, compiled the 7 Epitomes, Qi Lue, the first systematic bibliography of Chinese literature that organized thousands of texts into categories that influenced Chinese scholarship for over 2 millennia. His careful classification of philosophical, historical, poetic, and technical works established bibliographical methods that preserved knowledge of ancient Chinese intellectual traditions. He identified authentic texts, detected forgeries, and provided summaries that enabled later scholars to understand the development of Chinese thought from its earliest origins. His work rescued countless ancient texts from obscurity while creating organizational systems that made Chinese learning accessible to subsequent generations. Yet while individual ancient philosophers achieved lasting fame, Liu Xin's essential role in preserving and organizing the entire Chinese intellectual heritage remains largely unrecognized outside library science and classical Chinese studies. How many other guardians of knowledge worked quietly to organize humanity's accumulated wisdom while remaining invisible to the gratitude they deserved? Gentle mechanical sounds whisper through time as we honor the unnamed artisan whose skilled hands transformed theoretical designs into working wonders that amazed medieval courts. While Al-Jazari received credit for documenting ingenious mechanical devices in 12th century Mesopotamia, historical fragments suggest a master craftsman whose practical engineering expertise enabled the actual construction of these sophisticated automata. This anonymous engineer possessed intimate knowledge of metallurgy, precision tool-making, and hydraulic principles that made programmable musical instruments, automated servants, and self-operating fountains actually function as designed. They developed innovative casting techniques, waterproof sealing methods, and gear-cutting procedures that enabled complex mechanical devices to operate reliably for extended periods. Without this craftsman's ability to solve practical engineering challenges, Al-Jazari's theoretical concepts would have remained merely clever drawings. Yet, like many essential collaborators in great achievements, the master engineer's name was never recorded, their expertise absorbed into their employer's documented legacy. What other technological marvels depended on anonymous hands whose practical genius made impossible theories become tangible reality? Candlelight illuminates ancient verses as we meet a remarkable woman who created entirely new forms of religious poetry by weaving Christian stories from classical Latin phrases. Proba, working in 4th century Rome, composed the Cento Virgilianus de Laudibus Christi, a sophisticated literary work that retold biblical stories using lines and phrases exclusively from Virgil's poetry. Her innovative technique of creating Christian narratives from pagan classical sources required extraordinary knowledge of both religious scripture and Roman literature. The resulting poem demonstrated that Christian themes could be expressed through the most elegant Latin poetic traditions while making classical learning serve religious purposes. Her work influenced the development of Christian Latin poetry throughout the late Roman Empire and early medieval period. Contemporary scholars praised her literary skill and theological insight, yet later literary histories often dismissed her work as mere literary exercise, rather than recognizing her innovative contribution to both Christian literature and classical literary tradition. What other literary innovations bridged different cultural traditions while their creators remained footnotes in the histories they helped create? Peaceful farmlands stretch endlessly as we honor an 8th century innovator whose mechanical genius transformed agricultural production throughout medieval China. Wang Shu developed improved plowing systems, mechanized seed drills, and water-powered threshing machines that dramatically increased crop yields across the Tang Empire. His innovations in irrigation technology, grain processing, and farm tool design enabled China to support larger populations while requiring less manual labor from individual farmers. He wrote comprehensive agricultural manuals that documented his mechanical innovations alongside traditional farming wisdom, creating technical literature that influenced Chinese agriculture for centuries. His designs spread throughout East Asia, improving food production in Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, while enabling the population growth that supported the Tang dynasty's cultural golden age. Yet while political leaders of the Tang period achieved historical immortality, Wang Shu's foundational contributions to agricultural technology remain largely unknown outside specialized studies of Chinese technological history. How many other technological foundations supported the rise of great civilizations while their creators remained as forgotten as scattered seeds? Desert libraries whisper ancient secrets as we honor the countless unnamed scholars who preserved African intellectual heritage through centuries of political upheaval and cultural change. Throughout medieval and early modern periods, anonymous scribes in Timbuktu and other West African centers copied, translated, and preserved hundreds of thousands of manuscripts covering astronomy, mathematics, medicine, law, literature, and philosophy. These patient scholars maintained libraries that rivaled any in the medieval world, ensuring the survival of both local African knowledge and classical texts from Greece, Rome, and the Islamic world. They developed sophisticated preservation techniques for protecting manuscripts from desert conditions while creating copying networks that spread knowledge throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Their careful work preserved intellectual traditions that demonstrate the remarkable sophistication of African scholarship centuries before European colonial contact. Yet because they worked anonymously and their libraries remained largely unknown to outside historians, their extraordinary contributions to preserving human knowledge have only recently begun receiving recognition they always deserved. How many other guardians of wisdom worked through history's shadows, ensuring that the best of human knowledge survived for us to inherit and build upon?